really cool about this is today I'm going to talk about self-compassion. And I feel like we're witnessing in real time the importance of taking a moment, acknowledging a mistake happened, being okay about it, being kind to myself and understanding, and moving forward with this presentation. So this will be great. You get to watch this live and in action while I do this. Uh, because I can feel the negativity in my brain, right? And we're going to talk about this in a few minutes, but kind of what I'm trying to do is to take those negative thoughts, quarantine them is what I talk about, quarantine them, and be kind and supportive to myself. So we're going to all do this together. Um, once now that I'm starting this, I'm not going to be able to see the chats because it's too much for me to be able to keep track of, unfortunately, while I'm doing the presentation. But if you have any questions while I'm doing this, please use the Q&A option. You can pop in your questions and I will take a break after a few slides and address any questions that you have. And if there tends to be a pileup of questions at the end, I promise I will take whatever time we need to address them all. And you are welcome to hang on with that or end at 8 o'clock if that's what you need to do. So thank you all for joining. I'm going to talk about, as I mentioned, the science and practice of self-compassion. I love this quote from Brene Brown. The core of mental toughness is actually self-compassion. People who are mentally tough stay mentally tough because they don't slip easily into shame or self-criticism or self-loathing. They don't slip easily into shame or self-criticism or self-loathing. Self-compassion is an incredibly powerful tool to help us either avoid shame, self-criticism, and self-loathing, or at the very least, to lighten the weight of that and be able to allow us to be kinder and gentler to ourselves. So let me just tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a social worker, I'm a family therapist, I'm a certified life coach. I've written a book called Fatherhood in 40-Minute Snapshots. My second book, In My Rearview Mirror, which is my memoir, is coming out in winter 2026. I do workshops like this all the time. I have workshops almost every week for the next couple of months, which I'll tell you a little bit more about later. I do them on self-care. I do them on self-awareness, on how your past plays out in your present. I do it on sleep. And then I also do it on AI and mental health, on using AI for mental health support and personal growth. And I have a Psychology Today column where I focus on that topic as well. I've also created something called the integration path, which is a framework for overcoming trauma. And I'm working on a third book that will feature that process. I also do a lot of writing. I have a lot of articles that I publish, and I also create guides. And so if if this is something that you're interested in, there's 3 free guides that I have. I'll talk about those later, but if you want to take a look, you can follow the link or you can just scan the QR code. I have a guide on self-care. I have a guide on self-awareness, and I have a free guide on mindful meditation and how to get started. And yeah, right now questions can only be done through the Q&A just because of the webinar format of Zoom. So if you have any questions or if you're raising your hand or something, you can just put your questions in the Q&A section and I will get to them. So Kristen Neff, who I'm going to talk about in a little bit, she really pioneered the whole research into self-compassion and has done an enormous amount of work on it. She's really impressive. She's got a few books. If this is a topic that really interests you, I highly recommend her. She created something called the self-compassion scale. And so this is not the entire scale, but what I did was I selected a few questions and I thought it would be good to go through them, give you a chance to respond the way you would as if it was the scale itself. And I want you to be able to just think about your answer for each question and be able to see kind of where you fall on the spectrum of self-compassion. Are you self-compassionate? Are you not self-compassionate? This will give you a good sense of where you're at and what you want to focus on as we do the workshop today. So I'm going to read through these questions. You can rate yourself based on almost never, which is 1, and almost always, which is 5. There's no score about this. It's just to give you a sense of kind of where you fall on this continuum. I'm disapproving and judgmental about my own flaws and inadequacies. Again, this is a rating from almost never 1, almost always 5. I try to be loving towards myself when I'm feeling emotional pain. When I fail at something important to me, I become consumed by feelings of inadequacy. When I feel inadequate in some way, I try to remind myself that feelings of inadequacy are shared by most people. I'm intolerant and impatient towards those aspects of my personality I don't like. When I'm really struggling, I tend to feel like other people must be having an easier time of it. I'm kind to myself when I'm experiencing suffering. When I see aspects of myself that I don't like, I get down on myself. I can be a bit cold-hearted towards myself when I'm experiencing suffering. When I fail at something that's important to me, I tend to feel alone in my failure. The whole scale is actually, I think, 26 questions. So this is just a small portion of it. But again, I just wanted you to be able to get a sense of kind of what what we normally sound like, right? Like when I fail at something important to me because I'm become consumed by my feelings of inadequacy, I think many people do tend to feel that way. For those that want to get better, self-compassion looks more like I'm kind to myself when I'm experiencing suffering. So we'll go through a lot of this and get into more details. Let's start with kind of the definition of self-compassion. This is Kristen Neff, by the way, and this is one of her books, if you want to take a look. Self-compassion is the act of being kind and gentle with ourselves, right? So when we're with other people, a good friend of ours calls and says they're having a problem, they need some help. The way we are with them, right? Kind, caring, supportive, understanding, we're compassionate with them. We want to be the same way with ourselves when we have a problem, when we're struggling, when we're suffering, when we're having challenges. And there's 3 components to it. One is self-kindness, which is kind of the very typical way of understanding self-compassion, and that's instead of harsh self-judgment. There's common humanity, which we'll get to these in a second in a little bit more detail, versus isolation, and mindful awareness versus over-identification. One of the things that I've seen about self-compassion, and this is also something that Kristen Neff talks about, is that there are some myths associated with self-compassion that it would be good to address up front. And particularly if you find yourself kind of leaning towards these, maybe this will help you kind of get away from that. So one of them is that it lowers my standards or makes me complacent. And this is obviously not true. One of the key things here is that the research shows that people that are self-compassionate are more motivated to learn from their mistakes. And we're going to actually, I'll cover this a little bit in a little bit more detail. But the main reason is that people who are self-compassionate tend to be more resilient. And by resilient, meaning they can take hits, they can take challenges, they can experience difficulties, and then get up and be able to move forward again, versus having them really knock them down and not be able to get up. A second myth is that self-compassion is a weakness. I think this ties in a lot about how being connected to our feelings and being emotional is kind of perceived as a weakness. In reality, it takes enormous courage to be able to face our pain and the fact that we're not perfect and we make mistakes, and to still be kind and gentle with ourselves about it. The third myth is that it's selfish. And I think this is, again, this kind of like anything that involves self-care, self-compassion, right? Those things are selfish. They make us a bad person. But in reality, these are the things that make us even better people. And when it comes to self-compassion, being compassionate with ourselves, being kind to ourselves, gentle with ourselves, supportive of ourselves, actually makes it easier for us to be that way with other people. And that's really the key, right? That's why people who particularly spend a lot of their time caretaking for others really need self-compassion in order to restore their own energy, to feel like they can be, then give that energy back out to other people. And then the fourth is that self-compassion is really just feeling sorry for myself. And there is a line between feeling sorry for myself and self-compassion, right? Feeling sorry for myself is essentially kind of getting stuck and drowning in the negative feelings that we sometimes have. Whereas self-compassion is acknowledging, yes, I made a mistake. Yes, this is the problem. Yes, I am suffering. Yes, I'm struggling, but I can be understanding about that and I can figure out what I need to do to help myself to feel better. So that's an important distinction. Hopefully that, if you had concerns about self-compassion, hopefully that helps address some of them for you today. So Kristen Neff has done an enormous amount of research. There's now about 20 years of research on self-compassion, not just by her, but certainly started and built really by her. And some of the things that they found is that self-compassion lowers your anxiety and depression. It increases your life satisfaction. It reduces PTSD risk, post-traumatic stress disorder risk, particularly among veterans. It enhances emotional resilience, and it helps you keep healthier lifestyle behaviors. And that's an interesting, and we're going to touch on many of these a little bit later, but I want you to see that there is enormous research that this is really beneficial for you. And we're going to get into kind of the brain chemistry aspect of it here. So the thing about self-compassion is it's not just a good theory, it's actually something that impacts the way our brain functions. So self-compassion activates brain regions associated with safety and regulation, such as the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, which helps something what's called down-regulate threat responses, meaning it helps calm our threat responses. It reduces activity in the amygdala, which is essentially the brain's alarm system. And it decreases heart rate variability, which is a key marker of emotional resilience and nervous system flexibility. All of that to say, right, is that self-compassion helps calm the parts of our brain that get activated when we sense danger or we perceive danger or when we perceive threat. So it helps calm our nervous system. That's huge. It helps us be more resilient, which means something bad happens to us. Being self-compassionate allows us to be able to recover from that more easily. And so those are big reasons why it's so helpful. And in fact, there's a theory of therapy that I'm going to get to in just a second that talks a little bit more about that. I mentioned earlier the three components. Let's go into a little bit more detail on those. So it's self-kindness, common humanity, and mindful awareness. So self-kindness, right? That's the kind of stereotypical perception of self-compassion. That's comforting yourself when you're in pain. It's being kind to yourself. It's being gentle with yourself. It's doing the opposite of kind of that inner critic that we all have, right? It's being it's being with ourselves the way we would be with someone we deeply care about. So common humanity is a little bit different. And what common humanity is really talking about is the sense that we're not alone, that everybody has moments of suffering and challenges and difficulty, and everybody makes mistakes. And so even when we make a mistake, even if it feels like we're the only person going through this, the common humanity aspect of self-compassion is there to help us remember, you know what? Everybody struggles, everybody suffers. We are not the first person to make this mistake. We won't be the last person to make this mistake. And everybody else has gotten through it and will get through it too. Part of the challenge that we often have when we're dealing with difficulties, with suffering, is there's a shame component to it. Shame is this dark, dark weight that we often carry that makes things so much more difficult to handle. And so one of the ways to counteract shame is to give you a sense of connectedness, of not being so isolated. And that's what common humanity does. And then the third component is mindful awareness. And I talk about this in a lot of my workshops, the importance of self-awareness, of being aware of what's going on in your thoughts and with your thoughts and with your emotions. And there's a kind of Buddhist perspective of, thinking about thoughts and emotions as this flowing river. And what self-awareness does, what mindful awareness does, is it essentially, instead of being in the middle of the river, being kind of hit and knocked around by your thoughts and your feelings, you're standing on the bank of the river. You're still close enough that you can be connected to your emotions. You're not disconnected. You're not separate from, but you are not run by or overwhelmed by your emotions and your thoughts. This makes it easier for you to realize when you have negative thoughts, self-critical thoughts, right? That inner critic saying, oh, you screwed this up, you're terrible, right? You can be able to catch that. The way that you build that awareness is through this mindful practice, this self-awareness. So those are the three components. And then she goes on to talk about how there's actually elements of two types of compassion. And I think most everybody knows tender self-compassion, right? That's again what the stereotypical version of self-compassion, when we're being kind to ourselves and understanding and patient and that self-soothing piece. Fear self-compassion is something I'm not sure you've heard about, and so I want to take an extra moment to talk about. This is when you stand up for yourself because you care about who you are and what happens to you. So the way she describes it is, if a herd of cattle is stampeding toward you, it's not the time for self-acceptance, it's time for action. And right, it's the idea that, yes, there are moments where it's important to be able to accept the situation that we're in, accept who we are and how we're feeling. But there's also times where we need to stand up and say no, that there's times that we need to set a boundary in order to protect ourselves, that we need to make sure that we're doing what we need to provide for our needs, where we need to be motivated to make real change in our lives instead of just kind of accepting where we are. So you can see how the fear self-compassion can be really helpful with things like healthy behaviors, right? Because that's that drive. I'm gonna go and exercise because it's important to me, because it's healthy, not because I should, because I'm something's wrong with me, right? This is positive fear self-compassion. So again, there's the tender self-compassion, but there's also this fierce self-compassion. And I just don't want people to think that self-compassion is this weakness, right? It doesn't mean that you just let everything happen to you. It is about still at its core caring for who you are. There's just different ways of doing that. I wanted to give some examples of what self-compassion sounds like, because I think when you're just beginning to think about it, it can be a little bit hard to picture. So we all have that inner critic voice. So you make a mistake and it's like, oh, you're such an idiot. I can't believe you screwed this up. And that can just go on and on and on, right? So what's what's self-compassion is that where you're starting to you hear that, right? This is where that mindful awareness, that self-awareness is really valuable. You hear your inner critic, excuse me, say you're such an idiot, and you grab that thought, you quarantine it, and then you replace it with something like, that sucks, but it's okay. We'll figure this out. What can we do about it now? What do we need now? Instead of continuing to berate ourselves for a mistake that we made, we acknowledge that mistake, but we also start to figure out, well, what can we learn from it? How can we grow? What can we do to help ourselves now? And then some other examples like, I should be further along by now. I'm so behind, I'll never catch up. Things that you can say instead are like, I'm growing at my own pace, and that's okay. Progress isn't always visible, but I'm moving. I'm obsessed with an artist right now, and one of the lines in his song is it's gradual, but it's diagonal going up. And just the idea that like growth, if you have a line like growth is gradual, but it's still progress. And that's really what matters is right that you're going to be, I hope, trying some of these activities tonight and tomorrow and this weekend, right? And it's going to feel weird and it's going to be uncomfortable maybe. But I hope that you'll keep trying because you're building this muscle. And the only way that you do that is step by step, piece by piece, right? Your progress is going to feel a little slow in the beginning, but that's okay because you're still making progress. So being kind and compassionate about the effort you're putting into it and what you're trying to do is going to be really important. I have to earn my worth, right? So we were all born worthy. There's no question about that. We may have been convinced otherwise through experiences or people and the way they treated us, but we were born worthy, and there's nothing that can change that. And being able to, again, take that negative thought, that inner critic voice, put it in quarantine, and be able to come up with better thoughts for ourselves is going to really be a game changer. I touched on this earlier. There's an actual specific kind of therapy that focuses on self-compassion. And the main reason I'm bringing it up is because of these two concepts. So they talk about two regulation systems. One is our threat defense system, right? This is the one that where we anything that we notice or perceive as a problem, as a threat, as a danger, right? That triggers anxiety, it triggers our fight flight responses, and it often triggers self-criticism and will probably also trigger shame. And then we have our caregiving system, and that is when something positive is happening, when we are feeling safer and more calm, that's associated with safeness, soothing, and even hormones like oxytocin, which helps calm our nervous system. So the reason I really want to highlight this is most of us, through whether it's traumas we've experienced growing up, whether it's just the stress of our lives, whether it's difficult work situations or personal situations, most of us spend a lot more time with our threat defense system on alert. And it becomes easier for us to then feel anxious about something, to feel panicky, to be critical, or to feel shame. And what self-compassion does is essentially turns off that threat defense system and turns on your caregiving system. And when you're in that caregiving system, it's a lot easier to take chances because a mistake isn't the end of the world. A mistake is just a mistake. It's something you learn from and grow from. It's easier to be vulnerable with important people in your lives, particularly your romantic relationships, because you know you're going to be able to handle it. And you know that the possible benefits of that could really change your life for the better. So just thinking about that, I think is really valuable for you and trying to kind of live in a place where we're just more focused on being having the caregiver system on. So we talked a little bit about some other benefits. So there's also relationship benefits, and I think it's probably already becoming clear to you why and how this would help in relationships. But self-compassion improves relationships with others because you're more emotionally available and caring, right? When we're not busy shaming ourselves, when we're not busy having that threat system on all the time, it's much easier to look at someone else and be kind and supportive and caring. People who are self-compassionate are perceived as easier to live with. Again, because of the same kinds of reasons, they tend to be more forgiving and less reactive, right? Again, we're less reactive when we're coming from a caregiving place than we are from a threat detection place. And it's that sense of, living without constant fear of rejection. It's because when you feel safe, when you know that you can support yourself, when you know that if something bad happens, you can handle it, all the bad stuff in life just seems easier to be able to manage and thus less scary. Self-compassion and motivation. So there's definitely people who have worried a lot about whether self-compassion limits motivation because it's this sense of like, well, it's okay if you make mistakes, that's fine. And the research has shown that it's the exact opposite. That with this self-criticism cycle, when you make a mistake, you self-berate, right? You feel demoralized, depressed, upset, miserable. You probably feel shame, and it's harder to get up again. So we often tend to give up, or we, even worse, don't try new things because we're afraid of reinstating this self-criticism cycle. Whereas, like coming from a self-compassionate cycle, right? Something goes wrong, we make a mistake, whatever it is, we forgive ourselves. We look honestly about, well, what could we do better next time? How can we learn from this experience? And then we try again with a new and improved approach. But we're also more willing to take that chance again because the consequences aren't anywhere near as severe as what we perceive in the self-criticism cycle. And I, it's one of the things that I really love about this is that essentially self-compassion gives you this positive feedback loop that probably you've never really gotten to experience much in your life. And it really can make a difference for you. You can tell I'm kind of excited about this topic. Health and body image, right? Self-compassion can help you feel better about your body image. It lowers risks of eating disorders. It provides more motivation to exercise for health. And I touched on that a little bit earlier. And it helps people quit smoking and other kind of um, bad habits, difficult behaviors, and to try and abide by healthier diets. Because when you think about food or you think about exercise as an act of self-compassion, it's a very different perspective than, well, this is something I have to do, or this is something that I should do because it's good for me, but it doesn't feel good because it's forced or because it's coming from a punishment perspective, right? When it comes from a self-compassionate perspective, it's a much more unified sense of this is good for me. I'm taking care of myself. And plus, there's more flexibility when I have dessert or when I don't work out today or whatever it is, because there's no shame associated with it. So, what I'd like to do is take a few minutes and just practice a self-compassion practice with you. So, what I'm going to do, you can close your eyes, you can keep your eyes open, whatever you'd like to do, get yourself comfortable. I'm going to read you some things. You can repeat them to yourself. And just what I want you to do first is imagine or just think about a problem that you've had recently, a mistake that maybe you made, or just a period of struggle or suffering that you've experienced recently. And as you're envisioning that, I'm going to read you these things from this practice and just repeat them to yourself and just kind of go with the flow. Okay. So say to yourself, this is a moment of suffering. Another way of saying that is you can say, this hurts. You can say, ouch. You can say, this is stress. This is heavy. Now say, suffering is a part of life. Other people suffer. I'm not the only one. I'm not alone in my suffering. And then say, may I be kind to myself. And ask yourself, what do I need right now? What do I need to hear right now? What do I need to do right now? And then you can just repeat each line after me for this self-compassion affirmation. May I give myself the compassion that I need. May I learn to accept myself as I am. May I forgive myself. May I be strong. May I be patient. And let's just end with 3 deep breaths. In, out. In, out. In, out. I hope you could feel a little bit about what that's like to be kind to yourself. This is a good practice. I didn't mention this earlier, but it was on the early slide. I will share this deck with you tomorrow. So you'll have access to this, though honestly, you could also just Google Kristen Neff and you'll find a whole bunch of stuff from her as well. There's another affirmation that I want to share with you. Again, this comes from Kristen Neff. This is a moment of suffering. Suffering is a part of life. May I be kind to myself in this moment. May I give myself the compassion I need. Personally, this is my favorite one. I like this one a lot. There are other ways to think about practicing self-compassion. One of them is mindfulness meditation. I think I mentioned earlier, I do have a free guide that talks about mindfulness meditation, but partly what this is also talking about is that there are specific mindfulness meditation, self-compassion practices that you can do. And the main reason behind this, again, is to be able to more easily see when you're having these negative thoughts, when that inner critic is speaking so loudly, in order to be able to just grab it, quarantine it, and replace it with more kind and compassionate thoughts. Soothing touch is really nice. The research has been pretty clear about this, that obviously affection with other people is really special, but you also get some of that same benefit just by being affectionate with yourself. So my personal favorite, I like to put my hand over my heart when I'm being compassionate with myself, or particularly when I need an extra emphasis of compassion for myself. But you can hug yourself, you can put your hand on your shoulders or on your chest. And so there's whatever kind of feels good for you, you can do. And often you can do this while you're breathing slowly and offering just real kindness and gentleness to yourself. I've talked about this a lot, but challenge critical thoughts, right? The way that I like to think about it is you have these critical thoughts, you want to quarantine them before they get carried away and infect the rest of your brain, right? So you just want to kind of grab them, notice them, put them in quarantine, be like, okay, that's enough, and then replace them with more positive thoughts. I published an article this week called that focuses on the fact that your thoughts are not facts. And so if this is a new idea to you, if this is not something you're familiar with, I'm happy to share that article with you. But the idea is that our brain produces thoughts all the time. And most of them are probably not that useful, right? And like my favorite example is just like when something's really hot, like my brain's like, huh, I wonder how that feels, right? But I'm not going to actually go touch the burning thing because I know that that's not going to be helpful. That's still a thought. It doesn't make it true. It's just a thought, right? So just like calling ourselves an idiot is just a thought, right? We don't have to listen to it. It's not factual. It's just that's the way our brains are, right? It doesn't always produce positive things. So being able to be aware enough to grab those negative thoughts and replace them with something positive. And then daily self-care, this is something that I talk a lot about. It's really important to me. I'm doing a workshop, I think, in 3 weeks where I'll be focusing solely on different ways of doing self-care and why it's so important. And but the key thing about self-care is that self-care is a form of self-compassion, right? It's being kind to yourself. It's when you're starting to feel stress, to taking a break and breathing and kept, taking rest when you need it. It's um, going to see nature and spending some time in nature and getting that experience. Whatever type of self-care you're doing is also part of being self-compassionate with yourself. So I'm just sorry, I'm just taking a quick look at some of the questions. So someone just asked, how do we pull ourselves out of those negative thoughts, um, even when we recognize them as negative, but don't actually want to do so for whatever reason? So, the challenge with negative thoughts, first off, is that we're just so used to having them, they don't set off alarms, right? If someone came over to us and said, hey, you're an idiot, we would, most of us would be able to notice that's probably messed up. You shouldn't be talking to me like that. But when we do it from our own brains, it's just become so acclimated to it that it's really challenging for us to notice that as a problem and be able to stop it. So this is a muscle, right? You want to be able to build your sense of self-awareness, that mindful awareness, be able to notice when you're starting to have these negative thoughts so that you can grab them, put them aside, and think, create, rewrite, however you want to think about it, these new thoughts that are kinder, gentler, more supportive. Um, Next week, I'm doing a workshop on what I call scripts, which are just these, it's the how our past shows up in the present. And it's the idea that we're kind of raised to follow certain scripts, which is why you find yourself saying yes to things that you wish you had said no to, or that you keep replicating the same kind of emotional patterns, or you end up going out with the same kind of person over and over again, right? These are scripts that we're following that we learned growing up. And what really is involved, and that's partly kind of what can create those negative thought patterns as well. And so it's this building this sense of awareness. It's strengthening this muscle as much as we can in order to be able to notice it, identify it, and be able to like pull ourselves to that moment of, okay, this is a negative thought. This is not true. This is not factual. I'm going to quarantine this and I'm going to come up with something else. I don't mean to make it seem so easy because it's not easy, but the process is relatively simple. It's just, it takes a lot of practice and work to do so. Someone asked, how can you deal with folks knowing they're in their own space, always sitting in silence? You yourself know something is wrong. I read energy. Unfortunately, I'm not sure I understand that. Oh, okay. I think what they're saying is that when you're with people who are negative, how you're essentially absorbing that energy. And honestly, that is an issue of boundaries usually. This is something I also experience, like this sense of um, being so connected to the people and the energy around me that I can feel other people's feelings. But what I've really had to learn over the years is a way of turning that on and off. And again, it's the same kind of idea as a muscle, right? It's the ability to flip that switch and be able to say, okay, I can feel your negative energy, but I am going to go away, or I'm going to ask you what's wrong, but I'm not going to take on your problems and your challenges, or however you want to think about it. But that's kind of where that idea is. It's really about setting firmer boundaries for ourselves. Another way of um, doing self-compassion practice is guided imagery practice. So you can find a comfortable position, take a few deep breaths, and imagine a deeply compassionate being or your future wiser self, and go through the process of what it would be like to be talking to them, be experiencing with them, interacting with them. So this is really good for people that visualize really well. I personally actually do not visualize really well. It's only something I have realized about myself over the last couple of years. So I don't do visualization stuff anymore. But the whole purpose of this presentation is to be able to show you different ways. So hopefully you'll find ways that work for you. So if doing the affirmation isn't quite your thing, hopefully maybe something like this is. And this is about wraps us up. I'm just gonna go over these final points. So, right, self-compassion is backed by research, and it really does make a difference. And it shows benefits for your mental health, for relationships, for motivation. There are three components of it, right? We talked about that earlier, that the self-kindness, the sense of common humanity, that we are not alone in our suffering, and mindful awareness, which is the being aware of our thoughts and our feelings so that we can identify them more clearly and then replace them with something more positive. There's both tender self-compassion and there's fierce self-compassion. And again, this is a muscle. You're going to need to practice. It's going to take some time to get really good at it, but just practicing will help you feel a little bit better. So I hope that you will give it a shot. So that's the end of my presentation. I hope you really liked this. If you did, I hope you will take a moment to rate and review it on whether you showed up through Meetup or Eventbrite. I would really appreciate that. Um, I want to go through a couple of other things about what I'm doing. So first off, there are some upcoming workshops, and someone else also asked if I could put my website up again. So that will be in one of these slides as well. So I talked to you a little bit about a couple of workshops, the scripts workshop, which is next week. The week after that, I'm doing a workshop on internal family systems, which is learning to navigate your inner voices. This is for particularly people who've struggled with trauma. This is going to be really, really valuable. And it's one of my most favorite theories about mental health. And then in 3 weeks, I'm going to talk about regulation and restoration, how to know what kind of self-care you need. So we'll talk about that. You can join my meetup community if you haven't done so already. Here's the QR code for that. And then I've talked about the starter pack, the mental health starter pack, the three guides, the self-care guide, the self-awareness guide, and the mindfulness meditation guide. That's on my website. So buildonyourstrengths.com is my website. Free guides is the link, or you can just use the QR code here if you would like. I will pause just a moment for you to be able to do that. And then I have two other things I'd like to talk to you about. One is I've created a new coaching program called From Scripts to Freedom. So, for those of you that haven't heard about my scripts theory, this may not be as interesting as it will be next week. So, join me next week and then see what you think about it. But this is a special program, it's 8 sessions. It's really focused on changing these negative patterns and behaviors that you have that stem from growing up. And it's this new program. And so because it's a pilot program, I'm discounting it by more than 50% because I'm really curious to see how it's going to play out. And I'm limiting it to just 5 people because I think it'll be much easier to be able to have success this way. And then the components of it are really just individual coaching with me, as well as a workbook that I've created that allows you to not only get information about what we're covering each week, but also exercises on awareness, on practice, on calming behaviors. And if you are interested in it, this is not a requirement, but if you're interested in it, and working with AI for additional practice and information. If this is something that might be interesting to you, please just email me directly, or you can go to my website and schedule what I call a clarity call. I'm also do wellness workshops for organizations. If you think your organization might be interested in a workshop and having me come in for a workshop or virtually for a workshop, I'd really appreciate it if you would just connect me to someone at your office. My email is here. It's jeremy@buildonyourstrengths.com because, my first name is Jeremy. And so feel free to just let me know. And if you do, I would deeply appreciate that. This is a new avenue in my business, and I'm trying to see where it takes me. So thank you in advance. I mentioned the clarity call, which is really just a mini session. So if you're interested in working with me, but you're not really sure, and you're not really sure what you might want to cover or what that might look like, schedule an appointment with me. We'll talk for 30 minutes. I won't pitch you at all. It will be about what you want to talk about, or I'll answer any questions you might have. And then I won't even ask you to schedule an appointment. I'll let you think about it. I'll send you the information that you need, and then you can decide from there. So there's no pressure whatsoever because it's not my style. Um, okay, so that's everything. I'll send this around tomorrow. This is just my bio. You can have this when I send the when I send this out tomorrow. So tomorrow I will send you an email through Meetup that will share the recording of this, assuming that it worked and I can get it up. I'll share the slide deck and some other resources from the links that were on here as well. It looks to me like I may have addressed all or at least most of the questions. If there are any other questions, please let me know. I'm also happy to just hang on for a few minutes if you want. Yeah, any other questions? Well then, okay. Oh, what are some good resources? So honestly, I would go to Kristen Neff's website. I will include that tomorrow. I'm sure you can find it now, but I'll include it tomorrow. in the email I send around because she's just, she's the good stuff. Um, and yeah, and then someone talked about, yeah, I mean, when we're going through a difficult time, it is really hard to be kind to ourselves, but it's really crucial. It's really crucial. And I think you just want to do as much self-care, Yulia, as you can. Yulia. I think you need to take care of yourself. You need to make sure you're getting rest. You need to make sure you're eating well. You need to make sure that you're taking time for yourself. Yeah, I'm sure it's hard to sleep because your mind is racing. So if you want to schedule a call, we can talk about that and maybe figure out some ideas for you. Otherwise, thank you very much, everybody. Sorry, give me one second. Someone asked for the barcode again. I'm not sure which barcode, so I'm going to go to this one and hope that that's good enough, Diana. Uh, Akshat asks, what if the thought is too strong and hard to quarantine? Yeah, I mean, it is a challenge. The thoughts can be really strong, but again, that's because we're still in this place of putting extra weight on our thoughts in terms of them being real, right? It just takes practice to be able to notice these thoughts and say, okay, it's just a thought. And you may have to do it 20 times, 30 times, 40 times, right? Like it may take some time for you to be able to convince yourself that these negative things that you're thinking aren't real, but they aren't real, right? They are just random firing neurons in your brain, or they're things that you learned growing up that you now can change. It just will take some time. And again, that's actually, if that's something that you want to talk about, feel free, we can do that. Okay, so what if others are negative around you and affects yourself? Yeah. So loose, that's again thinking about boundaries, right? That's being able to set certain boundaries where what we feel is what we feel, but what other people feel is theirs, right? And if you've grown up being a particularly sensitive person, that's the way I grew up, for instance. If you grew up being a particularly sensitive person, then the idea of setting that boundary doesn't even seem right. But it is, and it is self-care, and it's self-compassion to be able to, it's that fierce self-compassion, being able to set a boundary that says, I know you're having trouble, and I'm sorry, and I'll help you if I can, but this is not my problem. This is not my struggle. You need to hold on to your own feelings. Some people don't realize that they're essentially trying to give away their feelings, right? And for those of us really sensitive people, we're just so used to picking up other people's feelings, we don't even notice it. So it's going to take a little practice, but you can totally do it. And if you want to talk about that, Luce, just let me know. Okay, thank you again, everybody. I appreciate your patience. This was really great. I'm so glad you participated. I look forward to seeing you next week, and I will send you all the information from today tomorrow. Okay, so have a great night and enjoy your weekend, everybody. Take care.